In Fiji, of course, and I can use the Fijian experience to highlight to you what is important for us. We believe that governments need to play or provide an enabling environment for telecom providers, the service providers, of course for the customers who are the citizens, and of course any other players in the market, which means a very clear, transparent regulatory framework. It means a regulatory framework where there is an absence of corruption. It means understanding that service providers can sometimes cherry pick, and how important it is for us as government to ensure that cherry picking does not take place, because we will, as a result, marginalize further those people who do not have access to technology. So from being the great digital equalizer, it can in fact become the great digital divider. The example that I can give in Fiji is, for example, we have something like 320 islands. We have 110 of which are habited. Nearly 60% or little over 60% of that population lives on this island, and nearly a third of the entire population of Fiji lives in this particular area, what we call the Greater Suva area, from Nosori to Lemi, nearly 300,000 people. So the ability or the willingness perhaps of service providers to get into remote villages that may have only 50 people or 100 people is not very attractive, or their willingness is not there. So as government, we have to ensure that we get the service providers to those areas too. And one of the ways, for example, we have seen now the Ministry of Education is talking about giving tablets and various other electronic devices to school children. Those electronic devices will mean nothing if you have schools in the rural areas or remote parts of Fiji, in some of the islands, that actually don't have the network. So you can have all the kids, all the students in the urban centers or wherever there is network coverage, having access to these fantastic tools of education, but those people in the rural areas don't have those tools. So it becomes a greater divide. The days when everybody got school books is fine. Everybody got the school books. But now when you have people, when we have an education platform that is electronic based, and you have some people who don't have access to that type of technology, you're creating a much bigger divide. So government's role is to ensure that we try and bridge that gap as quickly as possible. Now one of that of course requires, we have fantastic new technology that's available. There's a lot of cutting edge technology of course that's now being brought to the Pacific region. That probably has not been brought to the Pacific region prior to this. And indeed, one can argue that the Pacific region is really the last frontier as far as access to technology is concerned, and the level of which that technology is available. Because the reality is that, it's okay to say you have internet access, but at what cost? You need to look at affordability. At what speed is it available? If government services, for example, is going to be internet-based or IT-based, you need to ensure that you have the speed, because it defeats the purpose of having access to technology through government services if the speed is not there, if the capacity is not there. So from our perspective, ladies and gentlemen, whilst the technology is available, we also need to be able to direct some service providers, in our opinion, to the right space. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is because, as highlighted by the President of PETA, the Pacific region, generally speaking, does not have the economies of scale. Again, to put into perspective, the total population of Papua New Guinea is nearly 8 million or 7.5 million people. Every other single Pacific Island country has a population base, apart from Fiji, which is the next largest country, which is about 900,000 people, is all below 500,000 people. Some of the countries in the Pacific have 10,000 people. Niue has a registered population of 1,500 or 2,000 people. That's the entire country. Mobile phone connectivity in India is 10 million connectivities in a month. Our entire population is 10 million. This is the disparity that you have, but at the same time, it is a responsibility of every government. And of course, many of the service providers would want that to attract that new technology to the Pacific. And that is very critical for us. Otherwise, we can get left behind. Otherwise, we will get left behind not just socially, economically, but more so our ability to attract investment. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we need to do is to bring the service providers into a common space. And one of the areas that we are, of course, looking at the moment is the sharing of infrastructure. Some of you, when you take a walk around Suva, if you on a good day, if you look out towards your right, you'll see a very elevated hill on which you'll find different masts or different dishes placed on different towers. All of them are television companies, landline companies, you have also radio companies, all trying to fight for this very small space on this hill to get that connectivity. However, we of course can have only one single tower where everybody can put their dishes. And some countries have very successfully done this, where you have regulated shared infrastructure. So to have expect every single company to be able to put a tower on each hill or to be able to get a connectivity becomes very expensive. And this is why people tend to cherry pick. But if we had shared infrastructure, and government needs to put in place some regulations around that, and if we are able to, even before the regulations, have some form of agreement, then we will be able to get that connectivity and very quickly and very fast, and therefore your focus would be more on the service provision side rather than focusing on laying out capital even before you actually get a return on it. So that is very, very important to understand. And I urge those of you, of course the Fijian providers too, we need to get them back into the same room to be able to have the conversation, including the television providers and the radio providers, service providers. But also in your countries too, you may need to think about that, because that's one quick way of getting that level of focus, attention on infrastructure, but having a greater focus on the service provision and access to technology. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it is also very critical to know, of course, we now have bundling. We have a number of companies in Fiji, for example, that have benefited from what we are doing now. We have got into, a few years ago, about 5 or 6 years ago, we did a spectrum reallocation. And with the assistance of the ITU, we were able to bring about the spectrum reallocation, which helped us actually for the first time have an open, transparent tendering process on the 4G spectrum. We were also able to reallocate for radio services. We were also able to now, what we have as highlighted by Jackie, in respect of the digital television. We are doing trial runs now, and we have trial runs in the Suva-Nosori corridor at the moment. But none of this would have been possible if we had not done the spectrum reallocation. And we hope to, therefore, be able to provide greater services. Today, we have 3 free-to-air television providers in Fiji. With digital television, the opportunities, in fact, are quite great to be able to, through digital television, to now have 5 free-to-air channels with 3 actual companies. We can have more focus on, for example, access to education. You have access to agricultural services through television. So all of this, ladies and gentlemen, is very, very critical for us to be able to focus on and understand. And in Fiji, we hope to obviously finalize, as has been highlighted, the digital television rollout by mid-2017. The other last point that I would like to make, ladies and gentlemen, which is very, very important, and that is what I had mentioned earlier on, which is the need to have a huge focus on transparency. We believe it is very important. You'll, of course, get many companies will try and lure you to use their technology, but all of that needs to be done in a transparent manner. For government, it is very important. This is why, for us, we ratified the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. We have an independent corruption commission. As some of you would know, in some countries there have been huge scandals in respect of allocation of spectrum, where it has not been actually done in a transparent manner. And we believe that by having that, by doing that, you not only reduce your cost, but you're able to get the maximum return for your value for this, what we call limited real estate. After all, spectrum is limited real estate. And how best you utilize that limited real estate should be always focused on the national interest. And that is what we believe is very, very critical. I'd like to just highlight one of the issues, and that is there is a lot of opportunities for regional collaboration, sometimes directly or indirectly. And one of the examples I like to use is Samoa, for example, at the moment is bringing a submarine cable from Samoa to Fiji to land here in Botswana. I assume you may go out on a field trip, what have you, and you'll see that. But that cable, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately I don't have a map of Fiji, will pass between, comes up from the northeast of Fiji, will pass between our second largest and the third largest island. Our second largest island does not have the access to technology, to 4G, etc., in terms of having cables that we do in Viti Levu. So by having that submarine cable pass through, the Fijian government said, well, this is an opportunity, so we're building a pipe out of that to land on Vanuatu, which of course is saving us money, but ultimately it is also benefiting the providers of that technology. So these are many ways that we can actually collaborate. We may find synergies that could exist because independently, if we look at many of these aspects, you may not necessarily get the economies of scale. Just by way of information, Fiji organized a informal gathering of the ministers of finance from all over the Pacific. We also, back-to-back, had all the ministers for civil aviation to be able to discuss many of these regional issues, you know, without the flags, without the formalities. And we discussed a lot of opportunities that could exist. One of them, of course, again, recently we've had a request, discussion with the Minister for Samoa for communications. And he's also said, why don't we have some discussions around that informally? And we hope to do that, because I think there's a lot of knowledge sharing that could take place. There's a lot of intelligence gathering that could take place. I mean, for example, the Ministers of Finance, we talked about how, given the fact that you may have people who may be, you know, fraudsters as far as tax is concerned, etc., they may do something, for example, in Fiji, and you would not necessarily know that they will be traveling within a week to perhaps Samoa or Tonga, wherever it is. But if we're able to share that level of intelligence, we could, in fact, get a much better environment in terms of not only stopping fraud, but also to be able to ensure that our economies are actually protected. So I hope with this forum here, you'll not only be able to meet, of course, many of the providers are here, but also, and the technology providers, but also to amongst yourselves as regulators, to be able to have those levels of discussions, which are very, very important and could bring about a lot of positive outcomes for your particular jurisdictions. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you once again to Suva, to Fiji. There are many trappings in Suva, so please be aware of that. But please enjoy yourself, enjoy the Fijian hospitality, and I wish you a very good workshop. Naka, thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd now